I opened this non-fiction book in a bookstore and my eye fell on the following sentences that I like to read for you. And while you're listening, keep in mind that this is not a novel. It is historically accurate information. Here we go. Imagine one day you found out that the world you live in works completely differently from the way you thought. The buildings, streets, trees, clouds are nothing but pieces of theater scenery shifted by forces you never dreamt existed. That's exactly what happened to physicists a century ago. The author Tobias Hürter is referring to the pivotal moment at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century when scientists realized that Newton's famous laws of motion and gravity, while nearly universally applicable, have some important exceptions when they break down and no longer hold true. What a fascinating and probably confusing discovery it must have been for those who first began to realize this phenomenon. Science is of course a part of our human history, and this book called The Age of Uncertainty describes the moment when we humans were forced to fundamentally question everything we knew. And there is more. This book made me curious about another book with a strange title, 137. I absolutely wanted to read it for this episode, and I can't wait to tell you more about both books. But first, welcome back to Bold Books and Bones. Although Newton's laws work extremely well for most objects on Earth and in space, they break down at the quantum scale when dealing with tiny particles like electrons, or in extreme situations such as objects moving near the speed of light, or massive entities like black holes. So what Newton and humanity understood about nature and the universe was not the complete picture of reality. A better understanding of these gaps in our knowledge came from new theories, which we now call quantum physics and the theory of relativity. This book by Tobias Hürter brilliantly narrates the development of these incredible important discoveries. The smartphone that you and I are using and the foundation of the entire information technology revolution that we have witnessed in the last decades is based on quantum physics. Soon there will be quantum computers that will dramatically change the way we process information. So quantum physics and the theory of relativity are scientific breakthroughs that have already significantly impacted our lives. Now, the author of this book is a mathematician and a philosopher, and he not only explains in an accessible way how quantum physics and the theory of relativity came about, but more importantly, at least to me as a psychologist, he shows us in this book the personal side of the people who created these new theories. Additionally, he puts this in the context of the pivotal years between 1895 and 1945. It is a period that represents the bright and the dark years of physics. Given the density of extraordinary events that happened in these short 50 years, like 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Russian Revolution, the rise of fascism and Nazism, and many other things that shook up the whole world. The author keeps an eye on the main characters in physics and how their scientific research evolved during these years. Then during the period leading to World War II, he describes how the knowledge of these scientists was used to ultimately stop tyranny by creating and using the atomic bomb, a weapon that till this day threatens the very existence of humankind. The narrative of the book opens with Marie Curie, the first woman to ever receive the Nobel Prize. We learn about her rather challenging life, how she lost her mother at an early age, left her home country, Poland, in search for better opportunities as a woman in science and worked harder than anyone to earn her place in the academic world. Her brilliant research earned her the Nobel Prize twice. And if that were not extraordinary enough, her daughter followed in her footsteps and also received a Nobel Prize. Marie Curie coined the term radioactivity, and unaware of its immense power and danger to humanity, she conducted numerous experiments with radioactive materials. And tragically, she would die in 1934 from the devastating effects of prolonged radiation exposure. Chapter after chapter, the book takes us on a journey through cities like Paris, Berlin, Prague, Munich, Amsterdam, Brussels, Princeton, and others. And with each new location, we learn about new characters, about their personalities and their essential scientific contributions. With each chapter, time moves forward, bringing us closer to the devastating moment of the atomic bomb, which was a direct outcome of the quantum theory. By harnessing its principles, scientists unleashed the devastating power of nuclear energy. Let's take a moment to explore some of the key characters in the book. This is the famous picture of the Ernest Solvay Conference of 1927 in Brussels, Belgium. The conference is called after the man Ernest Solvay, who was a Belgian chemist, industrialist and philanthropist. He organized these conferences with the goal to address unresolved problems in physics and to promote scientific collaboration and advancement. The Solvay conferences actually still exist today. And you may have noticed that this picture is beautifully colored. It is done by Sana Dalloway, who is a professional colorizer of old historical black and white photography. I'll leave a link to her Instagram in the comment section. Now let's look more closely at this picture. I already mentioned this main character, the famous Marie Curie, who is sitting over here, not far from this man, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein actually worked just 2 decades earlier in 1905, before he became famous, at the Swiss Patent Office as a technical clerk 3rd class. He accepted this job after his application for doctoral studies was turned down. We could say that he became instead a hobby physicist, and after working hours he wrote several groundbreaking articles. In his work, Albert Einstein expands on the concept introduced by Max Planck, who is the man right here. In 1900, Planck developed the idea of energy quanta, proposing that energy comes in small discrete packet or particles, which he called quanta. This idea ultimately gave rise to the famous quantum theory. Before Max Planck, we believed that energy flowed in smooth, continuous waves. However, this wave theory could not explain certain phenomena in physics. We read in the book by Tobias Hürter that the way the quantum idea came about is quite surprising. Because when Max Planck introduced the concept of quanta, he expressed it with the letter H in his formula. And he used this as a kind of mathematical fix to make his formula work. The value of this number is tiny. It has approximately 26 zeros after the decimal point. However, it could not be reduced to 0, because then the formula would not work. So Planck introduced this variable h as a kind of temporary measure to make his theory work. But the little h in this formula would never go away, because once Einstein started to successfully apply the concept of energy quanta, it became clear that something else was going on. This variable h appeared to be a fundamental constant of nature and would sit at the core of a revolution in the human understanding of the universe. As of that moment, there is this wave-particle duality problem that will occupy the minds of physicists for many decades. One of the essential questions was if energy flows in waves, or does it behave like little particles, the so-called quanta? Or is it even possible that it can be both at the same time? Another interesting link between these two men is that when Max Planck reviewed the articles on physics by Einstein, when he was still working as a clerk at the Swiss Patent Office, he gives Einstein's theory a name that is now famous and universally used. Max Planck called it the theory of relativity. Now there are many more extraordinary minds on this picture. The author Tobias Hürter brilliantly introduces many of them in a compelling narrative. We learn about their great discoveries, but also about their personal quirks, traits, and sometimes rather eccentric or socially awkward personalities. We learn in this book how many of the brilliant minds were initially collaborating to understand nature and the universe better through quantum physics and the theory of relativity. And it shows that these new theories were not the product of one single mind, but the result of a collaboration between many people across borders, beliefs, and political systems. Unfortunately, during the dark years of populism, we see a familiar pattern of how even these people become divided. Einstein, for example, was Jewish, and because of it he was condemned by the Nazis and had to flee his country. The Nazi regime did what populist governments always do. They divide the people between their self-proclaimed superiority and the rest of the world. Even a rational scientific domain as quantum physics was divided by them between an inferior Jewish physics represented by, among others, Albert Einstein, and a so-called superior Aryan physics. And in their division, they work on one of the darkest projects of humankind, the atomic bomb. Some of them were on the side of the US and its allies, and others, like, for example, Werner Heisenberg, who you can find over here on the picture, was on the side of the Nazis. It is as always when the wrong leaders are in power. They bring out the worst in their citizens. Next to Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, and Max Planck, the author focuses, among others, on Paul Ehrenfeld, Erwin Schrödinger, Werner Heisenberg, Paul Dirac, Max Born, and Niels Bohr, and on this particular gentleman who we see here looking to his right. He has a troubled mind and needed help of one of the most famous psychologists of his time. And that brings us to the second book I'd like to share with you. The book's title is 137, and the subtitle is Jung, Pauli and the Pursuit of a Scientific Obsession. It is written by Arthur I. Miller, who is, among other things, a professor emeritus at University College of London. He tells the intriguing story of the collaboration between Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Gustav Jung. Pauli, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1945 for his formulation of a new law of nature, known as the Pauli exclusion principle. At one point in his life, he needs help from the famous psychologist Carl Gustav Jung because he shows quite some self-destructive behavior. He struggles with serious emotional issues and spends a lot of time in bars, getting drunk and getting in all sorts of trouble. When Pauli was about 34, he began his treatment with Carl Gustav Jung. Now, Jung is a man whose views on the human mind are quite particular. Jung starts from the premise that the mind has both conscious and unconscious aspects. To him, both are part of reality and are highly relevant for our well-being. One way to get access to the unconscious part of our mind is through our dreams. Jung therefore helped Pauli explore the psychological significance of his dreams. In this book we can read about some of Pauli's dreams and how they were given meaning through analysis and interpretation. And this book offers so much more, because it provides us with some insights in the minds of two extraordinary thinkers, and how their initial therapeutic relationship develops into a friendship and an intense correspondence. What I found particularly interesting between quantum physics and analytical psychology, which is the work of Carl Gustav Jung, is that both theories explore a field of reality that lies beyond our straightforward daily understanding of reality. Quantum physics and the theory of relativity stretch far beyond the world described by the laws of Newton. Through the use of mathematics and experimentation, they explore what happens at the immense small, at the atomic level, and the immense large, like black holes. In both areas, there clearly exists other dynamics than the ones we take for granted. On the other hand, the analytical psychologist of Carl Gustav Jung explores the mind beyond its conscious state and uses techniques like analysis of dreams and active imagination to try and extract meaning from the unconscious state. Although both explore the rather abstract and often hard to understand parts of our perceived reality, the two worlds of thinking could not be more different from each other. Additionally, Jung was fascinated by myths, by alchemy, ancient spiritual texts like the Kabbalah, and he introduced the idea of archetypes, which are, according to him, universal primal symbols that exists in the collective unconscious of all human beings. And according to him, they also exist across cultures and across time periods. One of the most iconic of such archetypes is the image of the Mandala. So according to Carl Gustav Jung, the unconscious contains images that are universal among humans. One way that led him to this conclusion was through alchemical books that contained images that could be found in the dreams of some of his patients, while these patients had never known about these books or images. Also, the number 137 in the title refers to the famous structure constant in physics, but is also the numerical value of the word Kabbalah, which is a form of Jewish mysticism that seeks to explore the nature of God, the universe, and the relationship between the divine and humanity. Wolfgang Pauli and Carl Gustav Jung had many conversations about these topics and even collaborated on a book called The Interpretation of Nature and the Psyche. It was published in 1952. I haven't read this one yet. The book called 137 by Arthur Miller and the book The Age of Uncertainty by Tobias Hürter both describe a fascinating part of history about our human search for truth and understanding. I very much like how in these books we learn that Wolfgang Pauli explains that truth lies somewhere between two extremes. On the one hand, he talks about the blue fog of mysticism, which represents the danger of overly mystical, vague or irrational thinking, and where we might lose touch with grounded logical reasoning. This kind of mysticism can bring confusion and a lack of clarity to our thinking, leading us far away from the truth. On the other hand, he talks about the sterile rationalism, where rigid, overly logical thinking dominates, potentially stripping away depth, intuition, and the richness of experience. What he conveys is that sometimes a purely rational approach might be too limited when seeking truth, leading to a form of thinking that, while logical, is devoid of imagination, creativity, or a sense of meaning. Wolfgang Pauli therefore talks about a narrow passage of truth between these two extremes, and one can fall down on both sides, which could result in a distorted understanding of reality. I find this thought extremely helpful in my personal search for knowledge, for insights, and for truth. And I think it is also relevant to our times, where all of us, through our smartphones, have access to more information than was available in the great library of Alexandria. How do we find the narrow passage of truth in this ocean of information? I think that staying curious and being free in our thinking might help in this. Thank you for watching. If you want to support this channel, then please subscribe and share this episode with people that might be interested. Hope to see you soon in the next episode. Bye for now.